The sun had no mercy that day. By the time Harlan Tate rode through the Powder River Flats, the air shimmered like boiling glass. And that was when he saw her, a girl. Chained to a fence post like an animal left for buzzards, her dress torn to threads, her skin blistered from the sun. Mouth dry as bone, she rasped. "Pull it down. Finish it." Words barely louder than the wind. For a second, Harlan thought she was talking to him. But her eyes were staring through him. They were the eyes of someone who had already decided she was dead. Only waiting for the world to agree, he dropped from the saddle. The dust swallowed his boots. Every sound seemed to stop except the slow creak of the chain cutting into her wrists. She wasn't crying. That made it worse. Her name, he'd learn later, was May Collins, 22. A cook for a line camp a few miles north, accused of cutting a ranch fence to steal grazing land. In Johnson County, that kind of rumor could hang a person faster than a gun, and whoever tied her here had done it for one reason, to make sure she didn't see another sunrise. Harlan touched the metal. It was hot enough to burn. He looked around. No guards. Just the wind and a half-broken water trough. A buzzard landed nearby. Too close for comfort. He knew what that meant. They weren't coming back. They already thought she was gone. May lifted her head just enough to meet his eyes. Her voice was dry. "You gonna do it, rancher? Or you just here to watch?" He stared at her, the heat prickling behind his neck. "Who did this?" She laughed, a broken sound. "Does it matter? They said I cut their fence. I didn't even own a knife." Harlan turned toward his horse. His lariat hung from the horn, and the top rail of that fence looked old, weathered, ready to give if pulled just right. He could see how to free her, but he also knew what that meant. If anyone saw him cutting that fence, they'd call him a thief too. And in this country, thieves didn't live long enough to explain themselves. The girl whispered again. "Pull it down. Finish it." The words echoed like a dare, and as the wind shifted, Harlan realized this wasn't just about one fence. It was about whether he'd walk away like everyone else or tear down the thing that might ruin him to save a stranger. So what would you do? Walk away and let the desert finish her? Or pull it down and change both of your lives forever? Harlan didn't think. He just moved. His hands grabbed the rope like they had a mind of their own. He looped the lariat over the top rail, made one tight dally around the saddle horn, and gave the gelding a soft whistle. The horse leaned forward, slow and steady, until the dry pine rail cracked with a sound that could wake the dead. The sound rolled across the flats, sharp and hollow. Harlan knew anyone within 2 miles just heard it. Trouble would come riding soon. The chain went slack. May dropped to her knees, gasping like someone learning how to breathe again. He was beside her in a second, cutting the last loop of chain with his fencing pliers. The metal fell to the dirt with a dull thud. She looked at her raw wrist, then at him, half afraid to believe it was real. "Why'd you do that?" she asked. "Didn't seem right leaving you hanging like a coyote trap," he said, trying to sound casual, though his heart was pounding like a drum. She smiled, barely. "Then you just made yourself an outlaw, mister." Harlan helped her to the water trough. She drank slow, careful, the way someone who's been dry too long always does. He noticed her hands still trembling. They weren't the hands of a thief. They were Cook's hands, scarred by hot iron, not barbed wire. "Who tied you up?" he asked. Her face darkened. "Silas Devereaux, works for the Crowell Ranch. Said I cut their fence. But he's the one been stealing calves off the line camps. He needed a scapegoat. And I was right there." Harlan felt that twist in his gut. He'd heard of Silas before. Big ranch foreman, loud with his whiskey, louder with his lies. If May was telling the truth, this wasn't just a bad day. It was a message. The big outfits were warning the small folks again, play by their rules or disappear. The sound of hooves broke the silence. Harlan grabbed May's arm and pulled her down behind the trough. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, rifles slung across their saddles. They were looking for something, or someone. The wind carried their laughter, cold and mean. May whispered, "They'll kill you if they see me free." He whispered back, "Then we best make sure they don't." He waited until they passed, then helped her up. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded, weak but willing. Good, 'cause we ain't staying here. Not now. They mounted and turned north, the sun already burning down on their backs. Behind them, the broken fence creaked in the wind like it remembered what happened. Now here's where the story turns. The moment that quiet rancher found out just what kind of trouble he'd stepped into, and trust me, you don't want to miss what came next. So before we ride any further, take a sip of that coffee or tea you got there, lean back and tell me in the comments what time is it where you're listening from. And hey, if you're liking this ride through the Old West, tap that subscribe button. It keeps the fire burning for the next story coming your way. The trail north was rough. Dust rose behind them like smoke from a fire that refused to die. May held tight to the saddle horn, her wrists still raw, her breath still shaking. Harlan rode beside her, eyes scanning the horizon every few seconds. He didn't trust silence, not out here. They reached the edge of Powder River by noon. The heat shimmered over the water like glass. Harlan slowed his horse and pointed. We'll cross there, under the willows. The current's calmer. May nodded, too tired to speak. When the horses stepped into the river, cold water splashed up and washed some of the dirt and blood from her arms. She looked down at her reflection. It didn't even look like her anymore. Just a ghost floating in muddy water. Once they made it across, Harlan pulled the horses under a grove of cottonwoods. They rested in the shade. He tore a piece of cloth from his shirt and dipped it in the river. Hold still, he said, cleaning her wrist. The water stung. She winced, but didn't pull away. Didn't think cowboys could be so gentle, she said softly. Harlan smirked. Don't tell nobody. Might ruin my reputation. For the first time she laughed, small but real. The sound almost startled both of them. But peace never lasted long out there. A gunshot cracked in the distance, then another. The sound bounced off the rock. May's eyes went wide. They found us. Harlan grabbed the reins. Right. Keep your head low. They tore through the trees, branches slapping, hooves pounding. Bullets hissed past like angry bees. One slug tore through the air and hit a cottonwood trunk beside them. Bark exploded like shrapnel. The horses screaming as dirt kicked up under their hooves. Another whined past Harlan's ear, close enough to part his hair. A round hit the riverbank, spraying dirt into Harlan's face, and he didn't stop, didn't look back. They broke out into open land again, the sunlight blinding. Up ahead, a ridge of red stone cut across the plain. He pointed. Up there, we can lose them. By the time they reached the ridge, both horses were lathered with sweat. They slid off and crouched behind the rocks, hearts pounding loud enough to hear. Harlan peeked out and counted 2 riders closing in. He aimed his rifle but didn't shoot yet. He wanted to see who they were. When the first man rode close enough, Harlan saw the brand on his horse, Crowell Ranch, the same mark May had talked about. He turned to her. They ain't giving up. May's voice cracked. What do we do now? Harlan wiped sweat from his brow, calm but cold. We fight smart. And we make sure they don't take you alive again. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something in his eyes that scared her more than the gunfire. Not anger, not fear. It was resolve, and right there, with the sound of hooves closing in, she realized this man was about to risk everything for a woman he didn't even know. But what he was about to do next, that was the moment the West remembered his name forever. Want to know what he did? The first rider crested the ridge, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the rocks. Harlan waited, still as a stone. The man dismounted, cursing under his breath, kicking at the dust. Behind him and the second rider kept guard, his hat low. Chewing on a piece of grass like this was just another day. May crouched beside Harlan, whispering, "They'll find us if we stay here." Harlan's voice stayed calm. "They won't, not if they're stupid enough to split up." He watched as the first rider tied his horse and started walking along the ridge. Every step brought him closer. Harlan could smell the man's tobacco. He waited until the boots stopped less than 10 feet away. Then he moved. Harlan waited till the first rider stepped through the narrow split in the rocks. One sharp blow with the rifle butt to the back of the neck. A soft crack, and the man dropped like a sack of grain. Harlan dragged him into the brush before the second could turn around. May's breath hitched. She had never seen anyone move that fast. The second rider shouted, You see anything? Harlan answered with a voice rough enough to pass. Just tracks. Looks fresh. It worked. The rider dismounted, walking right into the same trap. This time Harlan stepped out from behind the boulder. The second man still had one hand on the reins, the other fumbling for his pistol. Harlan's rifle was already aimed square at his chest. "Drop it," he said. The man froze, eyes wide. He saw his partner on the ground and did exactly what he was told. May stepped out too, trembling but steady. "Tell Silas Devereaux if he wants me dead, he can ride out here himself." The rider swallowed hard. "You don't know who you're messing with." "Lady." Harlan leaned in. "I think she does." Harlan tied the man's hands tight, stuffed a rag in his mouth, and sent his horse galloping south while the man stumbled on foot the other way. It would take him half a day to crawl back to his boss. That was all the head start they needed. May looked at Harlan. "You didn't have to let him go." "Yeah, I did. Fear travels better when it's got a heartbeat." They stayed under the ridge till sunset. Harlan buried the dead rider and covered the trail. When he came back, May was sitting by a small fire, holding a tin cup of coffee. She looked tired but alive. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" she asked. Harlan chuckled. "Every day. But then I remember who's running the place, and I figured they'd just follow me." The quiet between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was almost soft. For a man who had lived 50 hard years and a girl who had barely survived 22, it felt like the first calm breath in days. Still, Harlan knew it wouldn't last. Crowell's men would be back. And next time they wouldn't come in twos. He kicked dirt over the fire and said, "Tomorrow we ride to Buffalo. Sheriff's got to see what Silas has been doing." May looked at him, a small flicker of hope lighting her face. "You really think the law's going to help us?" Harlan stared into the dark. "I don't know. But I ain't letting him hang you without trying." Then he looked back at her, the firelight fading between them. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start a war we might not win. But the thing about the West was, once you pull one fence down, you never know what else is going to fall with it. And what fell next changed everything." Morning came quiet, too quiet for Wyoming. The kind of quiet that makes a man listen for trouble before he breathes. Harlan woke first. The fire was just ashes and the horses were restless. May was still asleep, her head resting on the rolled saddle blanket. For a moment he just watched her, thinking how strange it was that a girl chained to a fence 2 days ago could look that peaceful now. He saddled the horses and said softly, "Time to go." May stood, still sore, but stronger than yesterday. They rode toward Buffalo, the sun low in gold and painting the plains like a promise. Neither spoke much. Some stories don't need words to tell. By midday, they reached Fort McKinney. Dusty soldiers stood watch, a telegraph clicking somewhere inside. Harlan handed the sheriff the broken chain, the fencing pliers, and the name of the man behind it all. Silas Devereaux. The sheriff squinted at the chain. "You sure you want to push this? Tate, these Crowell men own half the county." He hesitated, tapping his pen. "Crowell's got the judge in his pocket." Harlan reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a short piece of barbed wire. He'd picked it up back at the broken fence, cut clean on one end, the twist on the other like a man's signature. "This has Silas's knife mark on it." The sheriff studied it for a long moment before nodding. "All right, I'll sign it. But this might cost you both more than you know." Harlan nodded once. "I ain't asking for favor. I'm asking for fairness. It took 2 long hours. But when it was done," the sheriff signed the statement. A deputy rode out to bring Silas in for questioning. May stood by the hitch rail, her hands finally clean, her eyes still red but olive. When Harlan came out, she looked up at him and smiled for the first time. "Guess I'm free now?" He smiled back. "Guess you always were. They just didn't see it." They rode out of town as the sun began to set behind the bighorns. The air smelled like rain, the sky burning orange and purple. May looked over at him. "What happens now?" Harlan chuckled. "Now, you start living, build something that's yours, maybe on that land by Crazy Woman Creek. I'll help you put up a fence that keeps the good in, not the people out." She laughed. For the first time, it sounded like hope instead of fear. That night they camped by the river again. May sat by the fire, staring at the stars. She said quietly, "I used to think one mistake could ruin your life. but maybe one good person can change it back. Harlan nodded. That's how the West works. You fall, you stand, and if you're lucky, someone helps you back on your horse. And somewhere out on the Powder River Flats, the broken fence still lies in the dust, a reminder that some walls are meant to fall. The story of May and Harlan became a whisper across Wyoming, not because of the fight, but because a man who had every reason to ride away chose to stay and pull one fence down. Now let me ask you, if you saw someone chained by lies, would you risk your peace to set him free? Or would you keep riding and tell yourself it wasn't your fight? While you think on that, give this story a like if it stirred something in you. And if you want more tales from the wild heart of the West, tap that subscribe button, pour yourself another cup of tea, lean back, and drop a comment. What time is it out your window right now? Because somewhere out there, another story is waiting for you.